Mary, I don't know where to start.
Well, I think the place to start is when you set foot in India.
Really?
Or, no, you have to start about how you got there.
All right, maybe we'll give a very brief outline of how this project
And how you were
originated,
selected to go on this thing.
and how all these heroes were pulled together to go on this project. The origination of the whole thing was an idea that General Wingate developed from 1942 when he was fighting the Japanese in Burma. Okay, back to General Wingate and his long-range penetration. He developed this plan to fly troops into Burma during the next operational season instead of walking in. They'd arrive fresh, and but how to do it, see? So General Wingate got this idea before in front of Winston Churchill. None of the other military commanders in the line had much stock. You know, they didn't give much credence to what he was proposing. But somehow or other, this plan arrived in front of Churchill, and he got to read it, and some of the staff, some of the high-level government people supported it. So Churchill called for Wingate to come from India and to go with him to the Quebec Conference with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president at that time. They were meeting to decide big strategy of the war as to what you know, when should the invasion of Europe begin, you know, what major strategies were to be pursued by the Allied powers. So this was a little, you know, a little snowflake in a big storm, really, before it got to Quebec. And Winston Churchill heartily approved it. He was very much in favor of, you know, unconventional strategy that involved surprise, and that would help. And here in the China-Burma India theater had been sort of a neglected, you know. We do as little as we can there to suppress the Japanese threat. It was sort of an out of the main arena thing, you know. They didn't have the means to really prosecute the enemy there, you know, when things were more critical in Africa and on the European continent. So it had been kind of a neglected thing, you know. The British Army had been fighting over there for a long time and had, you know, under terrible conditions. And the Japanese had really been giving them a hard time there. They just didn't have the means of controlling Japan's incursion into Burma. So anyway, at the Quebec Conference, Roosevelt said, he asked General Arnold, who was the Air Force chief at that time, could we support it? General Arnold said he'd support it. So that was once they put the stamp on, and General Arnold gave it a very high priority. He put General Cochrane, who was Flip Cochrane, Terry and the Pirates comic strip fame. You wouldn't know about that. But anyway, it was a very popular comic strip written by Milt Caniff. And Milt Caniff had adopted this Flip Cochran as the hero in the comic strip. And so Colonel Cochran was the chief, and Colonel Johnny Allison was the vice chief, the deputy, for what was later, it was originally called Project 9. Nobody knew what it was. And then it was called Commando Group. And then the troop, after our operation completed, the transport planes were designated as a troop carrier squadron and attached to the 10th Air Force in India. Skytrain or Goonie Bird aeroplanes, and these airplanes were especially equipped with a huge reel built into at the forward cabin in the plane, with 1,000 feet of metal, very flexible metal cable that ran through a fairing to the rear of the plane with a hook on the very end of it. And we had about a pole that was about 15 feet long that could be lowered and retracted. The only time it was lowered is when the C-47 was going in to pick up a glider. That was the purpose of it. The glider would be parked in a little field. See, this glider had been towed into Burma with some special supplies or some special troops to reinforce some of Wingate's people. Usually a couple, 2 or 3 gliders in one operation, except in the very original operation, which I'll get to in a few minutes.
That's the famous.
Yeah, that's the famous one. But
what kind of plane did you fly?
C-47.
And what about Uncle Johnny?
C-47. But then the glider on the ground had a tow rope attached to it. And on the end of that tow rope was a large loop that would be raised up on 2 poles, so that across these 2 poles would be stretched a piece of nylon cable, and now the transport with the hook on the end would come flying down just over those cables to snag that hook on that nylon loop and boom, jerk the glider out.
What a ride.
See, and this is the reel in the airplane now. The minute this engages, the reel in the airplane starts paying out cable.
Oh, thank goodness.
To enable this glider
to get going.
to accelerate to the same speed at which the transport. As this happens, the transport is slowing down and the glider is very rapidly picking up speed. See, it took a very skilled operator in the cabin of the transport to make this operation successful without snapping a line, see, or losing the total cable on the reel. So as the operator saw the cable zinging, I say zinging off the reel, because when you watch that, it was just like a blur. You could count the reels on the cable winding out. 1, 2, 3, and then the man would better start clamping down on the brake. It had a brake adjustment
so someone separate was running the reel.
Right, so that he could decelerate that reel, put additional friction on it to stop the cable from completely leaving the airplane, because that's what would happen if it kept on going. You lose the cable and everything, and the glider would crash straight ahead.
That would kill the glider pilot?
Maybe, maybe not, but it wasn't very healthy, especially if it was at night, you see. Anyway, your father probably made more night pickups. This is after the huge original operation, the invasion, so to speak, to take people in on specialized missions, and then a couple hours later go back and pick up one glider. And if there were 3 gliders going in, the crews from all the gliders would assemble into one glider to be snatched and picked up. The rest of the gliders would be burned and left there. But anyway, in addition to that, we had about 165 light planes that worked directly with Wingate's troops in Burma. They stayed in there and followed those troops around Burma, carrying supplies and evacuating wounded. Say a man twisted an ankle, some simple injury. In prior times, the year before, for example, they might have to leave that man behind because there was no way that they could, carry an immobile person with the troop. So here there was these light planes, and we had other.
How light were they? Like little tiny.
Yeah, like little
civilian deals.
Like what they call, like a little Piper. They were called L1 liaison. L1, L for liaison. They could carry a stretcher, one wounded person, and the pilot.
Oh.
It would be the equivalent of a small Cessna.